And what I see is once one person makes a move, everyone's making a move. And you might go in different directions, but that's okay. Like, whenever I see groups of nurses together, I'm like, oh, do y'all work together? And they're like, we did. And then she left. So I left. And then everyone loves what they're doing then. It's the fear of the unknown that sometimes you gotta take that leap. Someone has to do it.
How do we find joy and humor amid the challenges and demands of being a nurse? And how do we thrive rather than just survive? Let's talk all about it with none other than the world famous comedian, advocate, and educator Blake Lynch, also known as Nurse Blake, right here in episode 482 of The Nurse Keith Show. Hey there, this is Nurse Keith. This podcast is about you. It's about your personal and professional development, your career, and the healthcare system writ large. And I'm here to share education, ideas, diatribes, and informative interviews with some of the most inspiring people from the worlds of healthcare, nursing, entrepreneurship, and beyond. If you'd like to help other people find the show, you can leave a rating and review over on Apple Podcasts if you like. You become a patron at patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Nurse Keith, or just share the show with anyone who you think might enjoy it. The show notes are always over at nursekeith.com and the drop-down menu that is labeled podcasts. And I just love having you along for the ride. And I thank you from the bottom of my nurse podcaster's heart for being part of the growing Nurse Keith Nation. And as I said at the top of the show, we're here with Blake Lynch, also known as Nurse Blake. And Blake, you were here 50 episodes ago on episode 432, and we talked about all sorts of things. And my first question for you is, you talk to a lot of nurses. So, and I bet they bare their souls to you and tell you a lot of stories. So what are you hearing lately about where people are feeling most challenged and where are they thriving? Like what are the two ends of the spectrum you're hearing about right now?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me back. Can't believe it's been a year. But yeah, I talk to so many nurses from all over the world, which is my favorite part about what I get to do. But I feel like the joy in nursing is kind of coming back. I feel like we all obviously had a dip during and around the pandemic. It really took a toll on every single nurse around the world. And now that we're on the other side of it, nurses are excited to go back to work. However, there are still many challenges that nurses face. And on the other side of the spectrum, it's always been short staffing. But I think nurses are so now back in a space where they're more passionate about their job. They want it to be joyful and they want their job to be fulfilling. So they're striking. We're seeing nurses strike in record numbers all over. And so it's super inspiring to see. I think it just brings nurses together when we all advocate for the same thing. So I only think of good positivity when it goes to the nursing profession, moving forward. Change takes time, right? But you got to have patience and you got to stick together and find things in life that make you laugh, that make you enjoy life, and to really balance work in your personal life is the tricky part to figure out.
That is super tricky. And I know you worked in the ICU back in the day. You experienced burnout, like I experienced burnout as well. And you and I have both been open about that publicly because I think it's good to normalize and talk about.
Yeah, for sure.
Just like people who struggle with depression or anxiety or whatever, we need to talk about this stuff. So you're hearing that there's somewhat of a shift since the pandemic and there's a little more excitement in the air. And are you feeling excitement from new nurses? Like, are you hearing people are kind of like coming into the profession all gung ho, or what are the new nurses experiencing right now?
Yeah, I think they're so happy to be working, in the hospital setting. Many of them went to school during COVID, right? So they didn't get to have those like interactions with the patients that many of us had when we were in nursing school. So they're definitely excited to be with patients. I feel like the nurses who have been around a while, me included, I've been a nurse 10 years now, are excited to take, nursing students and new grads, under our wing like never before. And so it's pretty promising. And I see this really on Nurse Con at Sea. We just had our fourth sailing in April, so only a few months ago. And to see just nurses of different ages kind of come together and have a good time, I just think it shows community and it shows inclusivity and really just supporting each other no matter where we are in our life journey or nursing journey. So yeah, I feel like there's good energy in the air, Keith.
Hmm. Now, when you take people out on NurseCon at sea, you take them out, you know, your people are out there to have a good time and also learn. So they're, you
Yep.
know, they're CEUs, of course, and they're also on a cruise. So they're having a lot of fun and you put on an amazing show. I've heard all about it. Um, so you're seeing people kind of at their best when they're on vacation and they're really like they're going out to sea with Nurse Blake. So like what could be better, right? And when you talk to people when you're going around the country, you obviously hear lots of stories. And, you know, there are still statistics about the percentage of new nurses who leave the profession within the first year or two. And we do hear about bullying. We do hear about lateral violence or horizontal violence, as it's called sometimes.
Yeah.
So you're seeing and hearing that there is collaboration and cooperation happening. There are people who are really excited, and then there's the people who are struggling. And obviously, nurses are going on strike because there's something they want to change. And you
Right.
mentioned staffing, so it's sort of like the same issues kind of circulate around over and over again. But in your view, like you've been doing this 10 years, so if you look back and then you look at now, you personally see like a positive trajectory over time with the profession. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I know, I surround myself, with nurses that come to my show that are excited to be there to laugh with
Sure.
other coworkers. I see nurses excited when they get away and one of their conferences they get to go on as NurseCon at Sea. So I'm kind of surrounded by that positive energy, but it's the positive energy that I have always wanted to bring to the profession. So just by me providing a venue, right, like a cruise ship, and having nurses kind of build that environment, I think it shows it's not me, it's them. They're the ones that bring the energy and the vibe, and just being able to see the happiness and also the struggle. One of my favorite events we do on Nurse Kind of Teas, we call campfire. So it's not a real fire on a cruise ship, it's a fake little
Hmm.
campfire. Really cool. It looks like you're at a campfire, and we kind of all sit around by the fire, and we get like five nurses, and they just talk about the struggles they've had, how they've been able to overcome them or not overcome them, whether it's being fired by a patient for a patient who, was insensitive to whatever, maybe your sexuality, or, people that have lost a patient and they weren't able to really process that at work or
Hmm.
with their coworkers. And we get to do that on the cruise ship together. So we also allow nurses to maybe not be happy, right? Maybe they need a good cry or a shoulder to someone to, or an ear, just to share their thoughts and get them out in the world. And so it's really cool to see change happen within the nurses that I see at different events that I put on.
That's great. It's wonderful you provide those types of spaces for people to party, to have fun, to celebrate, and then people get together and talk. I think it's good to provide that as well. And it sounds like you give people those experiences. And at the top of the show, I asked the question, you know, how do we find joy and humor
Hmm.
when we're challenged by what's around us, whether it's death,
Yep.
illness, um, coworkers not being kind. You know, you
Yep.
just mentioned people being fired by patients, um, staffing. Gosh, we could talk about staffing
All day.
forever. It's just a thing. So, but when we're on the job, when we're doing our thing, we're out in the world, right? So, what are some of the strategies you've seen, or maybe you've used yourself, or you've taught people? How do you bring more of the positive energy to your workplace so you're one of the people who are contributing to the 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 balance going the other direction? How do you do that as an individual? Like what how do you make that happen around you?
First, you got to care for yourself. Like at the end of the day, you're the one who's you're not going to create a positive environment with people around you if you're not, positive. And I'm not talking about toxic positivity, right? I'm just
Hmm.
talking about just being yourself and creating a safe space for you to work and to take a break if you need a break, and just being there to support one another. I know when I, need help and need to get away.
Hmm.
I've been a nurse for 10 years now. I've been doing Nurse Blake things, I guess, since 2017. And right now, I need a break, Keith. So,
Hmm.
guess what I'm doing? I'm taking a break. I'm going to
Awesome.
be going away to a wellness retreat for 30 days with no phone and no computer because I
Wow.
know I need it, right? Like, I need it just to reconnect with myself because so many times throughout our life is a journey. We're always growing. And I just feel that I need to spend time in my own head, right? To figure out this next chapter in my life, what I want to do next, right?
Hmm.
And so I tell nurses that you have to, number one, focus and work on yourself. And then everything else around you is just going to fall right into place. I mean,
Hmm.
if you come to work with a bad vibe, ain't going to be good vibes in the break room, right? But if you
Right.
come to work with the spirit of I'm here to care for people, which is why we're all in nursing, then you're going to start building that positive energy.
Right. And, there's lots of talk about self care. Like since the pandemic, it's like you hear self care so much, like people cover their ears when they hear the term because it's just so, it's been like beaten into the ground in a sense, like the notion of self care. But at the same time, I mean, it's a real thing. We have to care for ourselves. It's just that the nomenclature around it has become
Yep.
so, um, well, you mentioned toxic positivity, but it's sort of like the tropes of like take bubble baths and, light candles and,
Right.
those things. So to take a more expansive view of what that means when you work in a high stress, intense environment as a nurse, whatever it is you do, how do you look at the big universe of how nurses can do things for themselves that uplift them? Like when people come to you and say, Blake, I need something, I need to do something. Like, what do you tell them?
Well, I don't give unsolicited advice, right?
Right.
So if people don't come up to me and I can tell them what to do. But
Right.
even if someone does come and ask, it's there's no right or wrong answer, whatever they choose to do for self-care or a job they're looking for. I never try. I let each individual try to figure it out themselves because the answer is already within them. And you're so
Mm-hmm.
right. I think there's such a negative stigma when we talk about or the title self-care or resiliency, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we use it as a way to beat nurses down instead of lift them up. You're not caring for yourself, or you
Mm-hmm.
need to be more resilient and stop complaining. And
Mm-hmm.
resiliency is not about that. And I think, some organizations do that to eh, for different reasons, right? But I think when it comes from each other, like people that are on your same level about, hey, you really need to take a break, if you see a coworker whose patient just died and they're, struggling a little bit, like, hey, I'll watch your next patient, take five, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is a form of self-care. We don't have to do yoga every day for an hour for it to be self-care. there's
Mm-hmm.
there's moments within our day, even if it's 5 minutes, that we're caring for ourselves. So we think of self-care like I got to read a whole self-help book in 24 hours, and that's
Right.
not necessarily realistic or really going to help you. You got to find moments throughout the day to care for yourself. I
Right.
a lot of us don't even eat during a 12-hour shift, right? Self-care is just like taking a minute to have an apple or a banana. Like
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to take a vacation for it to be considered self-care.
Yeah. And when you talk to new nurses or newer
Mm.
nurses, like say, first year, first 2 years, whatever, the people who are, they've been at it for a relatively brief period of time. Are you hearing the same things from them that you heard, say, 7 years ago when you first started out doing the whole Nurse Blake thing? Or is the message you're hearing from new nurses a little different in 2024?
I would say it's a little different because their school experience was different. We
Oh,
had
okay.
the pleasure of like being in a class with people. And when they went to school, it was all online, virtually via Zoom. So their experiences definitely different. For example, like we had to carry around, 100 pounds worth of books,
We
and
did.
everything that they have is on ebooks. So they just need to go around with an iPad or a computer. So our experiences are totally different.
Hmm.
However, I do think we share a lot of the same bigger concepts and struggles, just in a little different way. A lot of the new grads, they have the support of social media, right? Like they're able to connect with nurses and follow nurses online, to get tips and tricks, or to just, follow a nurse they or want to inspire to be. And when I was in nursing school, we had Facebook, but there weren't any like really people I could really look up to, online, or nurses really didn't have a presence that they do now today on social media. So you could find your tribe, online now.
Hmm. That's true. I mean, when I went to nursing school, it was the mid 90s. And, we were just getting dial up, you know. um, I did write my papers on word processor, I did have that, but we were just kind of getting started. Like I had, my first email address around that time.
Okay.
So, and yeah, we were carrying huge books. Like that med
Huge
surge book was
books.
enormous. Oh my
Huge.
gosh. I just can't believe it. So yeah, it's a different world, and
Yes.
the access to people like you, for instance, or people can access me, or lots
Right.
of other people. Those are the positives. So when we're looking for ways to just improve the balance that we have in our lives, and like you're going away to a retreat, I mean, that's a great
Yes.
example, right?
Yep.
Or you broke it down to the microscopic of, like, have a banana, so there's these extremes, there's one end to the other of the spectrum.
Yep.
So when you're talking to the nurses and they're talking about their struggles, um what is it like, what are some of the things you're seeing in people that they're bringing to their lives that you feel like are useful or powerful or efficacious? Like, are you seeing people bringing certain practices or even attitudes to their work and their lives that kind of inspire you when you hear about what they're doing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I feel like nurses now, they feel like they have a voice, right? Especially with the strikes happening kind of all over. So I hear nurses that are more confident in what they need, confident when they take a PTO day,
Hmm.
confident when they tell their manager, no, I can't come in, right? Instead of feeling bad, right, for not being able to come in. So this sense of pride, not about just working as a nurse, but just life as a nurse, and
Mm.
pride and confidence in themselves is something that I'm seeing, and nurses aren't feeling bad about sticking up for themselves. I feel like we have, mental health that can always be better, but I think we're more aware of mental health issues that we each face compared to back in the day, just even 10, 15, 20 years ago. So I think people are definitely caring for themselves a little more. And what I say, I wrote this down the other day, and so I'm going through a lot, Keith,
Hmm.
in a good way, in terms of just for my own mental health. And I started a Facebook group. It's called the Nurse Support Network. And my vision is that we will host weekly sessions where kind of nurses can just share for 5 minutes about what's going on in their life. Very supportive. Nurses are going to be able to talk to and share their stories from nurses around the world. But I wrote this little affirmation, and it's grant me the strength to care for myself with the same compassion I offer to others. And I
That's a good
think
one.
that is so important. And just a reminder, we put it all on the table for other people and not necessarily for ourselves. So being able to flip that mirror around back on you, I think is really, really important and really critical, uh, to enjoy your job as a nurse and to really enjoy your life as just a human.
Can you repeat that affirmation again?
Yeah. Grant me the strength to care for myself with the same compassion I offer to others. And then it goes on a little bit more.
Go for it.
That was just the courage to seek support when I need it, and the wisdom to find joy and balance between life and work each day.
That's beautiful. That kind of has a reflection of like the 12 step affirmations, kind of has the same rhythm and kind of feeling of that.
It does. And when I was back in nursing school, we had to we would go to an AA meeting, right? Alcoholics Anonymous. And I haven't thought about it for years until
Hmm.
recently. And I'm like, wow, they're a group of people from all different walks of life that are struggling with the same thing, but yet they're able to follow a program internationally and do it for each other. And I think, having burnout or suffering from moral injury, which many of us nurses face, Indeed put out a survey, a pulse on healthcare, and 1 in 3 nurses are burnt out. Why isn't there a place for nurses that are burnt out just to be able to have 12 steps to follow, right? To
Hmm.
heal themselves, to have affirmations like this to just remind you how important you are. So I kind of created the nurse support network around, the 12 steps that are just, there's many more than just Alcoholics Anonymous. There's one for everything nowadays.
There
But
is.
it was kind of my vision and mission to follow that because it works for a lot of people. It's been around since the 40s, and just put a different spin on it for me, right? Number one, and then
Hmm.
for other healthcare workers or nurses that might need it.
That's beautiful. Well, when we come back from the break, I want to talk more about your work with Indeed's Careers in Care Coalition.
Yeah.
And I want to touch base about the 100 city tour you were doing
Yeah.
last year when you and I talked on episode 432. You were just about to go on a 100 city tour. So there's a lot more to talk about. So hang in there with us. We'll be right back with the inimitable Nurse Blake right here in episode 482 of the Nurse Keith Show. Hey everyone, let's take a quick pause for the cause, shall we? Thanks for being a valued listener of the Nurse Keith Show. And if you'd like to help other people find the podcast, please consider leaving a rating and review over on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. This really helps propel the show and grow our audience. And I truly appreciate everyone who's already taken the time. And if leaving a public rating review isn't your thing, why not tell a colleague about the Nurse Keith Show by sending them a link so they can listen for themselves? After all, word of mouth is the most organic way for me to reach those who truly need to tune in. So if you'd like to do me a solid, please consider leaving a rating review or telling a friend or colleague. And by doing so, you'll be helping the Nurse Keith Show reach more and more nurses and healthcare professionals all around the world. Now, let's get back to today's conversation. And welcome back to the second half of the episode. We're here again with friend of the pod and my friend and colleague, Nurse Blake. And Blake, right before the break, we were talking about the affirmation that you created that you read for us twice. And you mentioned the Nurse Support Network, which is a group you just started not that long ago on Facebook.
Yeah.
And this group has a mission. So tell
Mhm.
us a little bit more about the mission.
Yeah, and I wrote the mission, Keith.
Read it.
I've only been working on this for a few days, but the Nurse Support Network, our mission is to provide a compassionate and supportive community where nurses can openly share their experiences, address burnout, and overcome moral injury. Through peer support, education, and advocacy, we empower nurses and ourselves to prioritize our well-being and find joy in our work. Together, we can create a culture of wellness and compassion, ensuring that every nurse feels valued, supported, and equipped to deliver exceptional care. And
Damn,
my
beautiful.
vision, thank you. And my vision for this, Keith, is that in every city in the next 5 years, there will be a nurse support network meeting available somewhere where nurses can go to before or after their shift just to share what's going on in their lives. And I think that actually hospitals could even host these for their own nurses as a
You
way to
think?
just,
Yeah.
I honestly think, I mean, they talk resiliency and well-being, but give us no tools or
Mm-hmm.
really no platform to be able to practice that, right? So I feel like if nurses kind of take this on ourselves and kind of manage this program ourselves and just let it live out in the universe for nurses that need it, I think it could be really beneficial to the profession.
It really could. And right before the break, you were talking about how well, I reflected on how that affirmation kind of, it had that kind of 12-step ring to it. And then you talked about how that was part of the inspiration. And, sometimes we need a little structure in
Yep.
order to examine something in our lives or change something. And we need to be with other people within that structure. Like you're going to retreat shortly.
Yep.
We need something because sometimes when we're out on our own in the big, wild, scary world, it's hard for us to do these things by ourselves. We need people around us, and we need a structure that kind of, like, some people call it a container to hold
Yep.
us, right? So that's sort of what you're
Yeah.
creating. And so I know you also do work with the Indeed's Careers in Care
Yeah.
Coalition, which I'm only just now hearing about. So Indeed does a lot of great things. A lot of my clients look for jobs on Indeed, and I've done some writing and stuff for them. So,
Yeah.
what is the Careers in Care Coalition? What happens there?
Yeah, Careers in Care is basically a job platform for nurses, with the nurse being the priority, right, and not the employer. There's so many other platforms out there where it's like employer based and then the nurse second. And this is kind of opposite. Like the nurse is in the driving seat on this careers platform. And let's say they do like resume tips, they have like mock interviews. So there's so much more support than just finding a job, but really how to secure that job and find the job that's going to fit your life and your schedule. And it just puts everything on the table, right? Like so many other when hospitals will post jobs, like a lot of things are hidden, like the pay
Mm-hmm.
or the actual shift. They'll just say, "Oh, it's day shift," but then all of a sudden it's like it turns into be a night shift job. So it's just like an open job platform that I find is one of the best because there are so many out there, which has the nurse in mind,
Mm-hmm.
and
And
the employee in mind.
yeah, but how do you find it? Do you just go to Indeed.com, or is there another URL where you find the coalition?
Yeah, just Indeed.com/careers in care.
Careers in Care. Okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
And they are also doing a lot more. They released their Pulse, their survey of 1,000 nurses about things that stress them out. What do they look for in a new job? What brings them to work each and every day, each and every shift? So they're doing a lot more work than just securing nurses good jobs, which is really cool to see.
And what are you doing around the Careers and Care Coalition? What's your place or part in that particular initiative?
Yeah, so I kind of work with them as the voice of the nurses, right? Just like you, Keith. We speak with a lot of nurses all the time. So just being able to share, what's going on in the nursing community. And what's great is they actually have another nurse that's I just work as like I just help, but a nurse that's on their staff full time to really help drive this cares and coalition. So that to me is really cool that they have like a nurse kind of in charge of this whole program.
That's great. That's really wonderful. So you've got that going on, and you have the cruise, the NurseCon at Sea.
Yeah.
When is the next one? When's the next cruise, by the way?
Yeah, Nurse Kind of Sea, it'll be our fifth one sailing out next year to the Bahamas. So it'll be April 2025. And we're actually doing our
2025.
first land-based event. We're doing NurseCon Orlando in September at Universal. So not many people like cruises. That's
Mm-hmm.
okay, but they still love NurseCon and want that energy. So we're putting it on land at the Universal Orlando Resort. So super excited about that offering as well. So you can catch me at Universal and Halloween Horror Nights
Oh, that
during
sounds
NurseCon
fun.
Orlando. Yeah.
That sounds really fun. And the last time you were on the show a year ago, I mentioned in the first half that it was episode 432. So it was 50 episodes ago, 50 weeks ago. And you were just about to launch a 100 city tour. And what was the name of that tour?
The Shock Advised Tour.
The Shock Advised Tour. That's right.
And it's
And
not over, Keith. I'm hitting 50 more cities. I go out on the road. I do two one-off shows this next week, but then I hit the road again with 50 more Shock Advice shows this September.
so you did the 100 city tour, right?
I
After
did.
you and I spoke. And
Yeah.
what was that like? And what did you what did you hear and experience from people? Because I know a lot of nurses come out to see you when you come to their city or town.
Yeah, it's so great. I mean, it's a lot, right? So it was 5 months, over 100 shows, 6 shows a week. So basically every night I was in a new city doing a show. But what keeps me motivated and driven is just seeing the crowd and hearing the crowd, and people posting like before and after the show, them with their coworkers, either going out to dinner together or bringing a party bus to the show, and just seeing that camaraderie and that sense of community that they don't really get outside of
Mm-hmm.
work, to just come together and laugh about nurse stuff. Get, keep, Keeps me wanting to do it, right? Like, I had 5 months where I didn't get a vacation. I didn't get to see my family. I mean, it's, even though I'm traveling to different cities, I don't really get to see the city because I'm just prepping for the next show.
Mm-hmm.
But it's seeing the audience and getting their feedback, which keeps me doing it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it keeps my cup filled.
Yeah. So your take on the profession and the way you approach it is very multifaceted. So on the one hand, you do the comedy, right? You do the
Yep.
show, which is getting nurses out for a night in an auditorium or a theater to laugh and have a really good time. Like you said, bringing a party bus with their colleagues, going out to dinner and seeing Nurse Blake. So there's the entertainment part that you do,
Yep.
which I think there's a certain release involved in that for people to laugh and hear you make fun of all this. There's so much to make
Thank
fun of, right? I mean, there's no end to the material you can
no.
glean from healthcare. And then you have the Nurse Con at Sea, which is fun. Like you have a drag show,
Yep.
you do a lot of fun things, but there's also education.
There is. Yep.
Um, and then you have the Careers in Care Coalition with Indeed, which is, you know, not um, not entertainment. This is like
Right. Yeah.
serious, down and dirty. Like, how do we
Yeah.
help nurses with their careers?
Yep.
So, for you, what is it like being this multifaceted personality and individual who approaches the profession from so many angles? Like, what's the
Yeah.
experience? Just what is it like for you, other than the fatigue and the work of the tour?
Yeah.
Like, what comes forward for you through all this different work you're doing in the world?
Whatever I'm doing is a showcase of what I need. And
Mm-hmm.
I think recently that's really been evident and apparent in the work that I've been doing. When I first started Nurse Blake, I needed to laugh. Like, this is when I was burnout in the ICU. I just needed to laugh and connect with other nurses and hear, hence my videos I make, right? And then I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I'm connecting with people online, but I'm still like kind of lonely. Like, I want to be able to hug nurses and see them and hear them laugh in person. And then it started with the tours and seeing nurses come out live. And then you're like, oh, we're making everyone laugh, but we want them to also be inspired to be a better nurse and to provide them tools. Like, I wanted, when I was working at the bedside, I wanted a better nursing conference and education to grow my practice. I'm like, oh, I'll start a nursing conference. And there was Nurse Con at Sea. And then it's hard to get a job, right? It's when I
Mm-hmm.
got my first nursing job, I had to apply to over 75 jobs before I even got a
Wow.
call back. And so I'm like,
75
I did.
jobs.
It was a lot. Yeah,
Wow.
I did. I had 75 applications before I got my call. But the one who called me back ended up hiring me. So thank
Mm-hmm.
you so much, Greenville Health System out of South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And then hence my work with Indeed, and now with the Nurse Support Network. I mean, it's everything that is going on in my life that I need, and it just turns out that I'm not the only one that needs it. Right? There's
Mm.
other nurses and nursing students out there that need it too. So, and I know my stuff isn't for everybody. I don't expect everyone to like me or need everyone to support my projects, but that's okay. But to the people that do support it and do appreciate what I do, thank you, because you
Yeah,
guys keep me going too.
that's awesome. And I have a question for you. Earlier, we were talking about how you've you've witnessed how you feel like nurses are more apt to say, no, I'm not working tomorrow,
Mhm.
or no, I'm not going to come in on my birthday or my wedding anniversary,
Yeah.
or whatever. Like they're I guess you would call them boundaries, you could
Yeah.
say. in the
Yep.
big picture. It's like nurses are exercising their boundaries, right?
Hmm.
So I've been privy to and been involved in conversations that there are some generational shifts happening. Well, they're happening everywhere, right? Of course,
Yep.
they're always happening. There's always four generations in the workplace.
Yep.
Some are edging their way out, some are coming in. So what's your take on the the younger generations of nurses, like not just the ones who are new nurses who were in their 40s or 50s coming into the
Yep.
profession, but I mean the younger ones who are in their 20s. What do you feel are some of the positive generational shifts that are happening?
Yeah, I just think it's the ability to be flexible, right? Like they have grown up in an age where technology has changed so fast, so
Mm-hmm.
they have to keep up with it and learn new platforms and tools. So when it comes to, hospitals and healthcare changing at a rapid rate for some things, right? They're able to really go in and dive in. And it's so funny because the older generation doesn't really like computer charting, right? They don't know how to use Epic, but then you see the Gen Z nurses being able to help them out in that, and you see the more experienced nurse just giving feedback on what's worked for them being a nurse and tips and advice and tricks. And what I love about my show, Keith, is that you'll have a 20-year-old nursing student laughing so hard next to an 85-year-old retired nurse, and I just think that energy and that diversity in age I see at my show, I think it can equate to those different generations working in the hospital together.
Yeah.
I think so many times you look for, well, why are Gen Z nurses bad, or why are they good, and why are boomers bad, and why are they good? But
Mm-hmm.
I think the sense of people having boundaries, I think helps really all the generations work together in a way, and being vocal about your boundaries. It gives you a better understanding of self and the other people I think that you work with.
Yeah. And I think you can learn from the younger ones, and the younger ones can learn from the older ones, right? Like there's institutional memory that older nurses have that can be pretty important,
Yep.
and it has it has its place, and there's a wisdom, and we could go off on a tangent about how in our culture, we don't value elders the way they might in Japan and other
Right.
countries where elders are revered. But I think in nursing, I think we need to always remind ourselves of the wisdom that the older, more experienced nurses carry. And,
Yep.
and if they're not as comfortable with some of the new technologies, it's a generational
Yeah.
difference, and they might be a little slower to pick up on some of it, right?
Yep.
And the younger nurses don't have the experience, like they haven't been out
Right.
in the world. They haven't
Yeah.
lived as many years.
You got to trust each other and work together,
You do. And the hospital, for instance, needs nurses of different levels of experience and age. I mean, it's part
Yep.
of the richness of the environment, the
Yep.
community. So, speaking of community and hospitals and the way people work together or don't work
Mhm.
together, on episode 432, you mentioned this perception, which I think is quite accurate, that professors and administrators. So you have nursing professors, and then you have leaders and administrators in healthcare facilities. You made this statement about how they should treat their nurses who work
Mhm.
for them or who study under them the way they expect nurses to treat their patients. Do you remember that?
Yes, I
Yeah.
do. I say it all the time.
Yeah. So why doesn't that happen?
Right.
And what are you seeing in terms of that actually shifting? Are you witnessing anything that you want to remark about?
Yeah, I see that changing. I think we realized during the staffing crisis that we need each other, right?
We
That we're
do?
respecting, right? That we're
Oh,
even though people have boundaries, like we're respecting the boundary, but still also the need that, kind of we are a team. So again, I have seen it change. I see it change in the nurses that I'm around, the feedback I get online. And I think it's a reflection of also the jokes I tell and what I share
Mm-hmm.
online. You could tell when nurses are kind of in crisis because my content typically leans that way.
Ah,
And more recently, it's been a little more positive because that's where I am in my mind, and that's where nurses are kind of in their mind. And it's not to say that every nurse is working, in the clouds and it's amazing. Because there are some nurses that are struggling out
yeah,
there. So
for sure.
it's not the same for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But if
Yeah.
you are in a toxic job, go to the Indeed job platform, get a new job.
Yeah. I mean, I tell people that, you can bang your head against any particular wall for so
Hmm.
long. And
Yep.
I always say, like, if your forehead is bloodied and if the blood's dripping in your eyes and you've been banging your head against that wall for, what is it, 2 years, 3 years,
Yeah.
whatever, you
It's
don't
not going
have
to
to
get
keep
better.
doing it. It's time
It's
to get
not going
out.
to get better. Yeah, it's
It's
just going
not
to
going to
get
get better.
worse.
And if
Yep.
you're the type of person who wants to be an advocate and a change agent and you want to make noise and make
Yeah.
trouble and be a squeaky wheel, go for it.
Yeah.
If you want to
Oh,
do that,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, for sure. Whatever is going
yeah,
to benefit you, right?
hmm,
And hopefully the greater good of the profession, but do what you need to do makes you feel
yeah.
good.
Speaking of which, doing what you need to do, I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
I mean, I talk to nurses all the time. People will share that they're in a toxic workplace or they're in a
Mhm.
place where they feel like they need to get out. However, then they share, they're like, I can't abandon my colleagues or I
Mhm.
can't abandon my patients. And I have certain things I tell people who are in that position. But what do you say to people when you hear like, oh, I can't leave because, my colleagues are going to be working extra hard or my patients will fall apart without me. What do you tell them?
I mean, honestly, it's like if you were all in a crash together and not one person gets out to go get help, then no one's going to get help, right? Everyone's going to be suffering together. And sometimes it's the first person in that group to make a move to make it real. It's fear, right? Like sometimes it's more comfortable being in a state of fear and you expect it as opposed to opening your mind and heart into
Hmm.
it could be better out there. We're just more comfortable living in a fear that we can kind of tolerate at some level. And I think, and what I see is once one person makes a move, everyone's making a move and
Ah,
you might go in different directions, but that's okay. Like whenever I see groups of nurses together, I'm like, oh, do y'all work together? And they're like, we did. And then she left. So I left. And then everyone loves what they're doing then.
mm-hmm,
It's the
right.
fear of the unknown that sometimes you gotta take that leap. Someone has to
Yeah.
do it.
Fear of the unknown and also nurses being such caretakers that we
Yes.
don't want to
Yes.
abandon our patients. We don't want to
Right.
abandon our colleagues. And we feel like we have to stay. I've done it several
Yeah.
times and it, it will come back to haunt you because you're going to stay when you really know you're supposed to go, and
Leave. Yeah.
um, I use this quote a lot. It's from a song by the singer Michelle Schacht.
Okay.
It's a really old song of hers. And the quote is, the secret to a long life is knowing when it's time to go. Like
Yeah. It
you've got
is.
to be able to grab your parachute and go sometimes.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you're out there in the world and you're doing all this good work with Indeed. And we want people to check out the Nurse Support Network on Facebook. I'm going to check it out
Yeah.
for sure. And people can
Please.
always go to nurseblake.com and there's NurseCon at Sea and you have so much going on. And last time we talked, I asked you these 4 questions that I ask all
Okay.
my guests, and it's been a
Let's do it.
year, so I feel like
Let's
we
do
can
it.
revisit them.
I love this, Keith.
Yeah. So the first question is, how do you, Blake, how do you view success? How do you define it?
Yeah, success is, I think, in terms of like my personal happiness, is success. I used to measure it by the number of views my video gets or how
Mm,
many people will come to my show,
hmm.
right? But if I'm not happy, that's not really success. So yeah, once I'm in a good, a good mood and it's a great day, then it's pretty successful.
That's lovely. Okay. Second question is, can you tell us about a person in your life, living or dead, famous person who you admire,
Yeah.
or someone in your personal life? Just who's somebody in your consciousness right now who you just like, they're just one of your people, one of the people you just look to and just admire.
Be my grandma Nan. I call her Nan.
Yeah.
She's been the most supportive person in my life. I came out when I was 15. And then through 15 to 18, I was put through gay conversion therapy
Oh,
for my
man.
parents. But my grandmother was always there for me and still continues to be there for me. We just spent a few days together, and it's so great to be able to have her support. And she's getting close to 80, but I still will bring her butt out on tour with me, throw her on stage if she's ever at a show. So it's super cool for her to kind of experience that we could experience, life together, and she could kind of see the projects I'm doing.
That's really beautiful. Wow. That's really great. Okay. I usually ask this question about a book or movie, like something that somebody finds really just is one of the touchstones in their life. So what's one that's in your life right now?
Oh, so this is great. Oh my gosh. I have two things, but
Tell me.
Inside Out 2 is such a good movie. If you haven't seen it yet, it just came out. And if you haven't seen the first one, watch Inside Out and then Inside Out 2. It's Pixar. And it just, especially the second one, really talks about anxiety and sometimes how we could get trapped in the circle of anxiety and not let it work to our advantage. And I cried, and I don't cry, Keith. And then the book I recommend, I say it's the 5-minute journal. It's your book, right? Like, you're writing the story, you're writing the journal. And I think it's so great. You write in it in the morning and at night. And it's just a reminder of like what your purpose is and what your plan is for the day and what you want to accomplish. And before you go to bed, what you accomplished. So really celebrating the wins, but also sharing what was hard. So the most important book you can write is your own book. So definitely journal.
The 5-minute journal. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
great.
Awesome. Okay. Last question. If you were named king of the world tomorrow, or queen of the world, if you prefer, what's one of the first things you would do with your magic wand? What would you want to do for your subjects?
Yeah, it would be free healthcare for everybody.
Yeah, makes sense, doesn't it?
It would be. I know we don't have the tool, like the staffing to be able to do that. So that's a whole other, I think last time I said the staffing crisis and then free healthcare. But now that it's been a year, that's our second interview, we'll go with free healthcare.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, you would be an awesome and beneficent queen or king.
Thank you. Oh, I know. I'm just kidding. Yeah. You too, Keith.
Well, Blake, this is great. It's great having you back. It's good to see you. I hope your retreat is wonderful.
Me too. I'm looking forward to it.
Just thanks for coming back. It's just good to chat. It's good to hear all the things that are inspiring you and moving you right now. And I appreciate your time so much and everything you're doing for the profession.
Thanks, Keith. Back at you, man. See you again soon, hopefully.
All right. Well, there you have it. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Nurse Keith Show. In the show notes, you'll also find a link to episode 432 so you can hear Blake's first interview with us. If you need personalized holistic career coaching to elevate your career, check out Nurse Keith Coaching at nursekeith.com. Mention the show and get 10% off your first coaching package. Make sure you check out the Health Podcast Network at healthpodcastnetwork.com. And we are adroitly produced by Rob Johnston of 520R Podcasting. And before you say goodbye, I'll leave you with this quote by Helen Keller. The best and most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They must be felt with the heart. Anyway, be well, dig deep, seek joy, keep in touch. This is Nurse Keith saying adios till next time from beautiful Santa Fe, New Mexico. And my friend Nurse Blake, also known as Blake Lynch, he is telling you arrivederci from
Orlando.
All right. Thank you, Blake. Thanks to everyone for listening. And we will catch you, of course, on the proverbial flip side.